I've been a fan of comic books and superhero films since as long as I can physically remember. I grew up watching all of the X-Men films and Spider-Man films that were released during the 2000s, and I have a lot of fondness for those superhero films that were released during that decade because I grew up with them and they paved the way for the cinematic universes that we have now come accustomed to. If we hadn't have had films like X-Men, Spider-Man, and even to an extent stuff like Daredevil, Ghost Rider and Fantastic Four, then there wouldn't be any groundwork for stuff that we have now, like the MCU. If those films hadn't have existed and paved the way in terms of maybe what does and doesn't work in superhero films, then we wouldn't have the stuff we have today. Which is why, for the last few months, Deadpool and Wolverine has been my most anticipated film of the entire year. Because as much as I love the character of Wolverine and as much as I love the character of Deadpool, the main thing that I was hearing about this film is that it was going to be a nice send-off for the Fox Marvel universe that kind of kick-started everything back in the 2000s. And what I can say, having seen the film last night at the UK multimedia screening in London, is that it definitely does feel like the best possible send-off that era of superhero films can possibly get. Don't worry, I will try and keep this review as spoiler-free as I can, but for the sake of people that haven't seen the film yet, please do not post any spoilers in the comments, because that's just going to ruin it for everyone, and there is a lot of stuff in this movie that happens, and that is best saved for experiencing it in the cinema. So please do not spoil it for others in the comments, that's all I'm going to say. Now, I have a bit of a strange relationship with Deadpool as a character. Deadpool, for a long period of time, was one of my favourite comic book characters. I loved him to pieces. I used to read the Deadpool and Wolverine comics all the time as a kid. I was even subscribed to the comic, so I'd get them once a month and read them straight away. And then the film came out in 2016, and I absolutely loved it. I've rewatched it multiple times since, and though I still really enjoy that film, it does get slightly less impactful on each rewatch. It's still incredibly rewatchable, but the jokes don't land as well as they did on that first or second viewing. And then there's Deadpool 2, which I saw twice in its opening week, and the first time I saw it, I absolutely loved it. I thought it was hilarious, I thought the action scenes were brilliant, and I thought it was fantastic. And then I saw it again, not even 2 days later, and half the jokes didn't land as well as they did the first time, and that's literally only a day or so apart. And I'm quite scared to revisit Deadpool 2, purely for that reason of, is it just going to deteriorate even more than it did that time? However, with that being said, I was still very excited for this film, purely for the reason that this is Deadpool's first foray into the MCU. So this is completely uncharted territory for this character and for the creative story opportunities that could arise because of this character entering that universe. And I'm going to be honest, if this is what Deadpool entering the MCU looks like, I can't wait to see what havoc he causes once he's then fully established with characters that we know and love. Because I absolutely loved this film. Maybe it was just my inner 12-year-old me just loving life and loving every second of it, but then at the same time I was just loving the experience as a whole. There are one or two things here and there that don't necessarily work or just feel a bit off, but at the end of the day I didn't really care. I was just so caught up in the moment and just enjoying life while watching this film that all of the usual things that I would gripe or nitpick about any other film, I just kind of pushed to one side and just enjoyed the moment as it was. And this is probably the most fun and rewarding I've found a Marvel film since possibly Endgame. And that's not me slating the entire MCU after Endgame. There have still been some brilliant projects past that point. For example, Shang-Chi is fantastic. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is incredible. Spider-Man No Way Home is incredible. Loki Season 1 and 2 was fantastic. Moon Knight is probably my favourite of the TV shows they've released. And personally, I thoroughly enjoyed the Marvels. I think it gets way too much hate and it's just a ton of fun. But I think the reason Deadpool and Wolverine clicked for me a lot more than some other MCU projects have done in recent years is for a couple of different reasons. The first one being what I mentioned at the start of the video, which is that this feels like the proper send-off that the Fox Marvel universe deserves. Because since the whole Fox-Disney merger thing, it feels like that universe has kind of just gradually just gone into a slump, and no one's really known what to do with it. This film pays homage to that entire era of film, and it does so in such a loving way, but also because it's Deadpool, it also rips the shit out of it as well. Again, not going into spoilers, but as you're probably aware, there are quite a few cameos throughout this film, and quite rightfully so. And whereas I thought the whole cameo multiverse thing didn't quite sit that well with me with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, even though I do really enjoy that film, I thought the section that relied on cameos kind of felt like the weakest aspect of the film, which is a shame because that's kind of the thing we were expecting from that movie. Whereas here, it feels like it's giving each and every character that shows up the love and respect it deserves, in a similar sense to what Spider-Man No Way Home did. Rather than having a character show up and then just immediately leave, not really adding much to the whole film, what Deadpool and Wolverine does is it has these characters show up, gives them their time to shine, and almost gives them the respect that they kind of deserved, which they didn't initially get beforehand. Now, cameos aside, the film as a whole is just an absolute ton of fun. I think this might be the funniest Deadpool film to date, and I'm aware that the whole breaking the fourth wall, you know, winking at the camera sort of thing might work for some people and might not work for others. I know there are some people that were at the screening who didn't quite like the film, and again, I can completely understand, because after 2 whole films of this, and Ryan Reynolds kind of doing the same thing in other films that aren't Deadpool, that style of humour can feel a bit grating when it's not done right. However, I personally thought that Deadpool and Wolverine did it incredibly well. There were 1 or 2 jokes that didn't quite work, but for the most part, I would say a good 90% of them do, and there are some genuinely hilarious moments throughout the film, whether it be needle drops, or wink and nudges to the camera, or even just moments that completely take you by surprise. There are so many iconic moments throughout this film, and I was laughing consistently all the way through. Also, the chemistry between Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman is fantastic. I knew that was going to be the one thing that everyone was going to talk about once this film came out, and rightfully so. You've got Ryan Reynolds being his usual cheeky and humorous self as Deadpool, but then he's nicely juxtaposed by Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine in this film, where he adds just as much anger and depth to the character that he has done for the last 20 or so years. I also really enjoyed the fight sequences throughout this film as well. I don't really look back at the previous 2 Deadpool films and think, my god, that was a great action sequence, outside of maybe 1 or 2 moments. Deadpool and Wolverine, on the other hand, has a couple that are like just stuck in my head, and I feel that they will be for quite a long time after this, which I found quite surprising considering it's directed by Sean Levy. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Sean Levy is a good director. He has made some really enjoyable films in the past that I've really liked. However, when it comes to action filmmaking, he's never really been one that's stuck out to me. However, in this film, there are some specific action sequences that really stuck out to me, and I think he kind of outdid himself. With that being said, there are 1 or 2 fight sequences that feel a bit scattered and all over the place in terms of how they're shot, and it's a little bit hard to follow, but they're just few and far between. I also really liked Emma Corrin in this film as the main villain. I thought she added a lot of menace and playfulness to her character that we've not really seen in the MCU for quite a while now, but I thought it was nice and refreshing to see a villain that was genuinely kind of threatening. I've seen some people online saying that the character motivations of her character aren't necessarily the clearest or most well defined, but for me and the sake of this film, I think she works just perfectly. So yeah, I had an absolute blast with Deadpool and Wolverine. If you're a Marvel fan, a superhero film fan, or just a comic book fan in general, you are going to absolutely love this film because it feels like it is cater-made for the fans of not just Marvel as a whole, but just comic books in general. And again, while there are a couple of aspects here and there that might not work for some people, you can definitely tell that the passion from Ryan Reynolds, Sean Levy and Hugh Jackman is there on the screen in its final form. Though it may be a bit imperfect in places, you can tell that they've put everything into making this film as good as it possibly can be, and making it for the fans, most importantly. So guys, those are my thoughts on Deadpool and Wolverine. I personally absolutely loved it. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the film. Again, trying your best to avoid spoilers, because there are loads of people out there that won't have probably seen the film yet. So please, let me know in the comments what you think of the film, whether you're excited for it, if you're going to see it. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.